Okay, so I think one of the most impressive structures in the history of the universe is the pyramids. The pyramids. Has anyone here had the pleasure of seeing the pyramids in person? Has anyone went to Egypt and seen them? Let me see. Oh, Kathy, brilliant. Well, listen, Kathy, I think Valerie as well. I'll ask you the big question, though, Kathy. The pyramids. Were they made by humans or aliens? What do you think?
Well, it was a long time ago since I went, Kyle, but it's a tough one. They look like they were made by aliens, but I think they were made by humans.
Well, whoever they were made by, I'm sure there's one thing which we can all agree on. Whoever made these pyramids, they had a plan. They had a plan. It wasn't a case of the project manager that day showed up and said, right, Davey, you take all the lads, go 100 miles that way, bring back some big rocks, and then we'll figure it out when you come back. I don't know why the Egyptian would be called Davey, but you know my point here. I'm sure it didn't work out like that. I'm very confident that they had an idea, they had a vision of what those pyramids would look like before the first brick was even laid. And if you want your presentation to be a success, you also need to have a clear plan of what it is going to look like. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about how you can structure your presentation from the very beginning to the very end so that you are delivering your message in a clear and compelling way. Now, for those of you who don't know me very well, my name's Kyle Murter. I run a business called Confidence by Design that helps people speak with more confidence and impact in front of groups. And I got into this line of work because I used to be pretty terrible at presentations. To give you an idea, my first ever presentation, I literally stood up, said 2 words and sat right back down. But I'm pleased to say things have improved a lot since then. 7 years on, I'm now a European champion of public speaking. I've wrote a 5-star book on the topic that you can see my background, some free advertisement. And I've also had the pleasure of helping thousands of people overcome that fear and deliver compelling presentations. And what I've learned from my own journey and my clients' journeys is that structure is absolutely critical. It's not the most sexy part of public speaking, but it certainly is one of the most essential parts. Because a presentation with a poor structure tends to be all over the place. It doesn't tend to be very clear, and it doesn't tend to cause action from the audience afterwards. So this is why we need to pay particular attention to how we're putting together our presentation so that we can create something magnificent, like the pyramids. So with that in mind, we're going to dive in to structure, and I would encourage you to have a presentation in mind as we're doing this. Think about a presentation you've got coming up or one that you would like to do in the future, because you can literally walk away from today with a plan for that presentation if you so choose to. And the other thing I will say before we get started is that today is going to be very interactive. We've only got a little amount of time, but I'm still going to make sure we can do some breakout rooms, we can do some questions, and that we can bounce ideas off each other. So get involved as much as you can, because the more you put into this today, the more you're going to gain from the experience. Does that sound good? Give me a thumbs up if you're happy to make it fun and interactive. You can give me a middle finger if you're not. Looks like Andy's the only one with a middle finger there. I'm kidding. Okay, we're good to go then. So let's dive into it. I believe we can structure any presentation into 3 distinct parts. I think we can divide it into the start, the middle, and the end. And I didn't come up with that myself, by the way. But the question here is, where should we begin planning this presentation? Should we begin with the start, the middle, or the end? So let's do a quick opinion poll on this. Raise your hand for me if you would start at the start. If that would be the first place you'd go when writing, planning your presentation. So I've got a hand up from Ewan. Ewan, would you mind sharing with the group why that's your choice?
always just been my go-to. Just the logical bit in my head goes, if I start with the beginning, then I'll figure out the next steps.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? Start at the start. Keep it logical. Keep it simple. Raise your hand if you'd go for the middle, if you begin with the middle in mind. The beef of the burger. Okay, we've got Valerie. Could you share with us what's your thinking behind the middle?
Well, light years ago, somebody said if you're going to have a presentation, you start off by telling them what you're going to tell them. That's the start. You then tell them what you were going to tell them, and then at the end you then repeat what you'd, just to refresh what you'd already said. So you won't know what you're going to put at the beginning, at the end, until you sort out the middle.
Yeah, I think it was Winston Churchill who said...
I have no idea who it was, but it seemed a good idea at the time.
It certainly did, and it certainly worked long after. So yeah, that makes sense as well. Okay, last question. Who would go for the end then? Who would start with the end? Okay, we've got a lot of hands up here. All right, who should I pick? Jeez, Richard, Litai, tell me, why would you go with the end?
I think unless you know what your end destination is, it's hard to plot out the rest of the journey. And when I say end destination, it's what takeaways or objectives, how will the audience think, feel, or act differently by the end? So if I have that purpose very clearly laid out, then I can appropriately map out the middle and the start.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point there. And you know something? It's one I would agree with. I do believe that the best place to begin planning your presentation is the end. Figure out where you are going, because then you can create the start and the middle with that key ending in mind. The other thing that we must consider is, where is the most important part of the presentation? Where is the part that will be remembered the most afterwards? It's the end, because what is said last lasts with the audience. So we want to pay special attention to our ending. Now, for those of you who start with the start or start with the middle, be a bit open-minded today to the ending. Of course, you can revert back to what you've been doing if you want to, but just for today, try starting with the end in mind and see how you find it. Because the first question you've got to ask yourself to come up with that ending is, what's my key message? What's my key message? If the audience can only remember one thing from my presentation, what do I want that to be? You know, they've done studies where they take a group, they show them a presentation, and then 1 week later, they ask them, they quiz them on how much they remember. Do you know, or what would you say as a guess would be the percentage that people remember 1 week after a presentation? What number would you throw out there? Just shout it out. Go ahead.
5%.
10%.
10, 5%. The answer is 5. 5%. So you've got to ask yourself, what 5% do I want them to remember from my presentation? That's the question you've got to ask yourself when you go into every form of presentation that you do. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about what your key message will be, but I'm not going to leave you alone to do this. I'm actually going to put you in a breakout room with someone else, because it's often good to bounce ideas off each other. So I'll give you about 4 minutes in this breakout room to come up with what your key message is. Just try and write your key message in a sentence if you can. And then we'll come back in and hear what you came up with. Any questions about what we're about to do? No? All right, give me 11 seconds and you will be whisked away. Here we go. And 3, 2, 1. The rooms are open. Make sure everyone in the room gets a chance to speak, please. Welcome back from the other side. So I hope you got a chance to at least get some ideas flowing in that short period of time. Could I come to Farouk, please? Where are you, my friend? What did you come up with? Tell us what your presentation's about and your message, please.
So I was chatting to Chris, and me and Chris were sort of we were saying it's 5%. It's very like a small amount, so you have to like try be as concise. I do pen testing, so I'm thinking I'll do a presentation on pen testing. Chris wanted to do one on leadership, who's really interesting leadership styles. So the thing that I came up with is pen testing is fun. That's the key message.
All right.
And just keep it short and simple.
Yeah, keep it short, keep it simple, and that's good because now you know what your North Star is. You now know exactly what you're trying to do. So you need to make sure that the start and the middle scream that message that pen testing is fun. That'll keep you on track all the way through. Very good. Chris with a K, did you come up with a message and presentation?
Well, I'm actually glad you called me because I'd like to bounce it off you. So so my presentation is on, I'm doing a webinar on how to have a difficult conversation. And so, I mean, I've got the objectives in terms of the content we're covering, and the essence of it is effectively, kind of do's and don'ts, if you like, in terms of how to make a good conversation. Yeah. But the thing I think I came to was something about, kind of firstly reframing, how we see them, so making them a courageous conversation instead of a difficult one, and also that it's not all down to you, that you can co-create this conversation with someone through the different skills and empathy that you practice, but it's giving them, I guess, the tools and the confidence in order to go and have these conversations. So I haven't quite identified the one-liner, if you like.
Yeah.
But it feels like I'm kind of closer.
Yes. Well, it sounds like the idea of turning a difficult conversation into a courageous conversation, from a mindset point of view, is the overarching point that will affect all of your suggestions in terms of what they should do going forward. So maybe that is your key message, to change the mindset of it being difficult to being exciting or courageous or whatever word resonates with you and the topic. Perhaps that's the way forward, Chris. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I like the sound of that, because that one of the key points I'm making there is around mindset, and so I think that could be the red thread, definitely.
Super. Doug, you've got you've got your hand up there.
Thanks. I wanted to feed back to Chris that to me the two words courageous conversation is very memorable. If that was your close, I think I would remember that, and it's got
Okay, well, I'm definitely claiming that then. Thank you.
So I guess leading on to that would be don't reveal it too quickly.
Right. Okay.
If that's going to be the rabbit out of the hat or the tie together.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, super. It's a good alliteration in there. Hopefully everyone got a chance or has an idea now of what that message could be. And this is something you might want to think about more in depth way after this workshop. But you've got to identify what that key message is, because that's going to help you build the rest of the presentation as you're about to see. So once we have the message, what we need to now think about is what will take up the majority of our ending. And that is, of course, our CTA, a call to action. In other words, what you want the audience to do with this information. What you want the audience to do with that message. Okay, what you want them to do next. And of course, this depends on the presentation that you're doing. Sometimes, if it's a sales presentation, you want them to, buy something or book a call, etc., etc. Other times, if it's just an inspirational speech that you're doing, you want them to change their thinking, their mindset, their viewpoint. It can be very different depending on what the presentation is. But just to give you a guide in terms of how you can make your call to action very sticky and very actionable for your audience, I thought I'd give you a few tips. The first thing is that your call to action must be clear. It must be clear. You see, if you confuse your audience, if they are not sure about what they need to do next, they'll do nothing. They just won't take action. So you have to have absolute clarity in terms of what you want them to do or what you want them to think. And if you're worried that you might not have that, a really good idea is to show your call to action to a friend, a colleague, someone that you trust, and then they can give you feedback on whether they understand it or not. And then you can make adjustments if need be from there. The other thing is your call to action has to be achievable. Achievable. What do you think I mean by that? An achievable call to action. Alex, what do you think? Any ideas?
I think it needs to be relatable and realistic for the audience to achieve your call to action. So whatever your request is, I think they must be able to achieve that realistically.
Yeah, exactly. If you ask people to do something which almost seems impossible to them because they don't have enough time or they don't have enough skill or whatever it may be, they won't end up doing it in the first place. So you've got to make sure for your specific audience, and this is where knowing your audience comes in, that your call to action is going to work for them. It's far better to get people to take one step in the right direction than taking no steps. So maybe don't ask them to climb the mountain straight away or go cycling up the mountains like Kathy. Just get them to do a nice cycle in the park, first of all. Maybe that's the best strategy there. Now, the third thing, which can be really effective in a call to action, it's not always possible, it depends again on what your call to action is to make it time dependent. Time dependent. Now, I'll come to Cal on this one. Cal, why do you think having a deadline for a call to action works so well?
Because the further along that timeline that let's say you give them, the more likely they are to not take it.
Yeah,
Want
essentially.
you
Or
want
even
immediacy.
worse, if there's no timeline, who knows when it's gonna get done, right? It gets sent to the bottom of the pile potentially. Or it's just not, there's no urgency to get it done. I don't know if what you guys were like in school, but for me, I would wait all the way up to the last minute to get that homework done. But I would get it done because there was a deadline. It had to be in for Monday. Without that deadline, it probably never would have been done. You've got to think about the same way with your call to actions. Can I have a firm date where people have to take action before then? Because that will encourage them to act a lot more quickly. So take a minute, just yourself. Think about your message. Think about what your call to action could be for this presentation based on that. I'll just give you a minute in silence to think about this. Write down what your call to action could be, and then I'll come round and see what you have come up with, and the group can give you a bit of feedback potentially. So take 60 seconds starting now. About 10 more seconds left. This is just a rough draft. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, I'm going to come to Lena this time. What did you write down or scribble down there for your call to action?
So my call to action would have been to scan a QR code and basically check out a VR adoption model that I have created so that people can see how the technology can be adopted in the future.
Brilliant.
So for me, that's kind of the quickest way to get to where I want to get, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. So scan a QR code. That seems very achievable. It seems simple. It's clear as well. Kind of time dependent too, potentially. So that sounds great. Fantastic. Let's go to Bolton with Chris. What did you put down for your call to action?
Go
ahead, Chris.
Sorry, I put down my call to action was observe one leader this week and note 3 traits that make them unique.
Brilliant, brilliant. I like that. Observe one leader and write down 3 traits that make them unique. I like that. Very specific. Seems achievable as well. Fantastic. Does anyone have a call to action that they want to run by the group? Want to share? Claire Miller, go ahead.
My call to action is actually getting the children to fill out feedback sheets. I'm going to run workshops for the pages of Serena's Adventures. I call it road testing. It's to find out whether what I think works actually does work. And some of the feedback, if the children are really young, is actually drawing a face on a bit of paper. You know, is it happy or smiley or sad or upset? And the other children who are a bit older, who can write more, they answer a few questions so that I find out immediately whether what's worked beyond my actual observations of what was going on in the workshop.
Lovely, like it. Yeah, that's brilliant. So getting them to fill out the feedback form, again, nice and clear, achievable, time dependent, because they're going to do it now. Love it. Brilliant stuff. So this is the idea. Figure out what effect you want to have on the audience. What action do you want them to take, or what do you want them to think? In what way do you want them to change going forward? That's going to make up your call to action and the majority of the ending of your presentation. We're really talking about the last 60 seconds here. You're going to be emphasizing your message and throwing in that call to action at the very, very end. Any questions about endings before we move to the start of your presentation? Okay, all right, let's go forward then, or back, depending on how you want to look at it. This is getting a bit strange from a timeline point of view, but now we're going to look at the start of your presentation. And, you know, openings are very, very important, but many people squander their openings by just saying something like, "Hi, my name is Kyle, I'm an accountant, and today I'm going to talk to you about accounting things." You know, it is not the most exciting opening that people go with often for their presentations. Where, on the other hand, what they could potentially do is they could start with a hook. Now, a hook is simply a way to grab the audience's attention. And a great question, you can ask yourself for coming up with this hook is, how can I earn their attention? How can I earn their attention? And I first truly began to see the power of a good hook when I worked for WWF. Not the wrestling, the wildlife charity, I should say. Basically, my job was to stand on a busy city centre street and get people to stop and adopt a lion, a tiger, a panda, an endangered animal. So I was one of those annoying people. And basically, when I first started, I would go up to people and I'd say, "Have you got a minute to talk about the pandas? Can I talk to you for a second?" And they just go right by me, like water around a rock. It was really bad. But I had a colleague, and he did something very different with his approach. He would go up to people, and he would say, "What do you think elephants are most afraid of?" And they were far more likely to stop, have a conversation with him, and actually adopt an animal. Now, why do you think that was? What is it about that question? What do you think elephants are most afraid of? Why did that make people stop and talk to him? Any ideas? Kathy, go ahead.
It was kind of intriguing and got them thinking.
Yeah.
And there is there's a thing that elephants are afraid of mice. That might have come into their head. So it sets off a whole load of stuff in their head.
Yeah. It interrupts whatever was going on as they were walking by. It makes them think, and it makes them curious. And that's the key word, curious. Curiosity is what the opening seconds of your presentation need to create. They need to make you think, what is this about? I'm really interested. I want to hear more here. That's what you've got to try and establish in the opening of a presentation. Now, you could do it through a question, like my colleague did, but there's lots of different ways. I mean, today, I got you curious by looking at the pyramids, for instance. You probably thought, this is about presentation skills. Why am I looking at a pyramid? That maybe made you curious today. You could also start with a story if you wanted to. You could start with a fact, a figure, a quote, interaction with the audience. There's a plethora of different ways that you can create a hook. But the key thing is that you have one, because you really do need to earn people's attention, especially in this day and age. So here's the deal. I'm going to put you in a breakout room again with new people, in case you didn't like the last ones. And I want you to try and come up with a hook for this presentation you're planning. We're looking for a 10-second hook here. Just something that'll get people engaged and will make them want to hear more. Again, please make sure everyone in your room gets a chance to speak. That is very important. And when you come back in, I'll come to you, so be ready with your hook. Give me approximately 7 seconds and I'll set up some new rooms here. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. So everyone should have a group of either 2 or 3 in their room. There should be a button on screen now. If you click it, it'll take you to a magical place. Now, I appreciate you didn't have a lot of time to come up with an opening there, but did anyone come up with one they'd like to share? They'd like to try out? Cal, go ahead, please.
So first thing I would say is, do you like rugby? And assuming they say yes, then I'd be like, okay, what does Bowden Barrett and One Element fitness training have in common?
All right, okay, very good. So I like the question idea. The challenge is, what if they don't like rugby?
What if they don't like rugby? Then I choose another sport they might like. Okay, what sport do you like? Football.
Okay.
Who's a football player? The benefit of it is, the whole point of the hook is that most sports use the fitness training that I would then talk about.
All right, I see. So it might be even good to do a raise of hands then, in that particular case. Who here likes rugby?
Yeah.
Not many. Who here likes football? And then you're gonna find something. You know, you go all the way down the list. Ping pong, anyone? Eventually you're gonna get somewhere, and then you can go from there. But that sounds like a good one, my friend. Very good. I think Nigel, you had your hand up potentially.
Yeah. So I was just talking it through with Hasma. Mine would be: do you want to know how far away you are from achieving your goal? I can tell you, it's that far.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. And intriguing. I'm wondering what is this? What is that difference there? So I want to know more.
Do you want to know what that is?
I would like to, yes.
I'll tell you at the end.
Oh, thank you.
I'll tell you, that distance is the distance between your ears, because it's all in your mind, isn't it? It's your mindset and your attitude which gets you to take action. So
yeah.
But it was just that sort of driving at the start to say, of course I want to know, I want to achieve my goal. I didn't realise I was that far away, but how can I only be that far away? So yeah,
love it.
That's what we talk through.
Brilliant. I love that one. Valerie, I think you had your hand up too.
Yeah, I've been pushed out into the traffic here by Chris and Emma. We were talking around the subject, and then suddenly, brilliant Emma. I mean, she should be a copywriter. What do plants and teenagers have in common? And you think, what? The whole thing about pruning roses is the timing and understanding the hormone flow. That's in a nutshell. So hopefully that will have hooked somebody in.
Absolutely. I think you hooked all of us in today.
My roommates were very appreciative.
Brilliant. So I think everybody's getting the idea here. It's all about just creating that curiosity. And we've heard 3 questions, but that is not the only way you can do it. There's lots of other methods. Again, fact, figure, quote, picture, story, interaction, lots of different tools you can use but you've got to earn that attention at the very beginning. Now, once you've earned it, the other thing which you may need to include in your opening is a little bit about you. If you don't know the audience, it's very important that you go from being a stranger to knowing very quickly. Why do you think that is the case? Why do we not want to be a stranger to our audience for a long period of time?
Lack of trust.
Exactly, Cal. Yeah, trust. You ultimately in the presentation are the messenger. And if I don't know you, I'm less likely to trust you and therefore less likely to listen to you or take action on your words. So you've got to introduce yourself if the audience do not know you. And the simplest way I know of doing this is the 3W method. The 3W method, which is who, what, why. Who, what, why. Who is very simple. It's your name. But it's often overlooked because you have to remember that your name is what people are going to recommend after your presentation. And if the audience, I mean, how many times yourself have you been watching a speaker and you simply don't know their name? If you don't know their name, you can't connect with them afterwards, you can't refer them, you can't do all of these things. I could say to, look, I went to a great presentation by Nigel. He was talking about people's heads and the size that they are, but I can't remember, well, I don't know his name. Was it Nigel? Was it Neville? I don't know, right? So saying your name is very important. Don't overlook that. The second thing is what. And this is what people get wrong all the time. It's saying what you do, what you specialize in. And you know what people tend to do here? They tend to use clunky terms. They tend to use language which really means nothing for everyday people who are outside of their industry. Today, you might have noticed I introduced myself by saying I help people improve their speaking confidence and speak with more impact. If I just said presentation skills, a lot of people would get that, but some people might think I'm actually a presentation skills person for cooking, for cakes, because presentation is a big part of cooking. So you want to make sure that there's no doubt about what exactly you do. So try and use simple terminology when explaining what you do. And then we come to why, the third W. And this is the most important part. This is where you share why this topic means something to you. Why it means something to you. And what I recommend doing here is telling a story. Tell a story about your relationship with this particular topic. So in Valerie's case, she would need to tell a story about why this topic of teen hormones and plants and so forth, why that means something to her. Maybe she's got a story which reveals why this means a lot to her. You need to be thinking about the same. Cal, for his presentation on sports, I want to know why Cal is so passionate about sports. Okay, maybe he's got a background, a history of being an athlete. We need to hear a little bit about that. It gives you credibility, but again, also takes you from being a stranger to known by the audience. So that's something to think about potentially if you don't know the audience who are in front of you. Any questions on the opening, the start of presentations in general before we move to the middle?
Kyle?
Yes.
So you'd open up with the hook and then do the intro, yeah? Is that the ordering?
I would say so. I would say so. You could start with a personal story, Chris. You could do it that way if you wanted to, but often it's just better for people to have that separation. They understand that hook is one line to really engage people, and then the intro after. Yeah. No problem.
Cheers.
No problem. Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, on your diagram, Kyle, you've kind of got the relative amounts, in the size of the little rectangles you've got. Is that roughly the proportions that you would propose spending on each section?
Yeah.
Time-wise.
So yes, I see what you're saying. So for the hook, I would say about 30 seconds maximum for a hook, but ideally 10. And then for you, it really depends how much time you have, Kathy. So if you've only got a limited period of time in your presentation, you might need to do this part in about 40 seconds.
Mhm.
If you've got more time, if you've got like a 2-hour workshop or something like this, you can maybe expand and go into a 2 or 3 minute story potentially. So it's all about the time that you're working with in
Yeah.
general there.
And
Does
then
that
for the
make sense?
start, middle, end, it looks like the start is almost, from the diagram at least, almost, 2/3 of how much you spend on the middle. Is that how you feel it should be spread out,
Well, again, it's about how much time you have. So if this is a 5-minute presentation, that's pretty well balanced there. 1 minute at the end, 1 minute at the start, 3 minutes in the middle. But if you've got a longer presentation, then of course your middle is going to be a lot longer in that particular case. Richard,
thanks.
go ahead.
Yeah, when you're talking about these 3W methods of who, what, why, I'm curious if you would ever reverse the what and the why. So who, why, what. I'm thinking of people like Simon Sinek that talks about people don't care about what you do, they care why you do it. And starting more with your motivation or your why behind it then makes people more receptive to the what.
Yeah, it's
Is that not because people respond better to emotion rather than just being told something?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you, Richard. Ultimately, the what is really a sentence. It's one sentence, and then you're into the why. So there's not much of a delay there. It's not like you are going on for a long time about the what and then you finally get to the why. We get to the why fast. If you prefer, you can flip the order there and say, this is why I became a da-da-da at the end. So yeah, it's all malleable, but as long as those 3 things are there, I think that's the most important part. Super. All right, let's move on to the beef of the burger then, the middle of the presentation. And a great question that you can ask yourself to come up with the content for your middle is, what do they need to hear? What do they need to hear? So in other words, in order to believe this message, in order to take action on that call to action, what do they need to hear? That should help you come up with, say, a few different points for your presentation. So for instance, if we take Chris with a K's presentation, which is all about taking conversations which are difficult to being courageous conversations, you need to ask yourself, Chris, what are the key lessons or the key points people need to understand in order to believe that a difficult conversation can in fact be a courageous, exciting, enjoyable one potentially, right? That'll hopefully help you come up with a few points. Now, unfortunately, I can't tell everyone what your points should be because everybody's presentations are different here today. But I do want to give you a few ideas of how you can make those individual points exciting and engaging for the audience. So 3 things I would recommend doing is, firstly, signposting your points. Signposting your points. Does anyone know what I mean by signposting? Any ideas?
Making it obvious.
So go expand a little bit if you wouldn't mind, Farouk. What do you mean by making it obvious? Sorry.
I'm just thinking about like road signs, like how they're in your face. That's what I'm thinking. But like just sort of emphasizing on each point again and again.
Exactly. You are very true. It's just like road signs. It's making it clear that we're coming to something important in the presentation. So you always want to kind of give the audience an idea of where the presentation is going, a roadmap, essentially. And that is what signposting does. You're handing the audience a map when you signpost, because they now understand, okay, our first point that we're going to cover is this. And then later on in the journey, our second point is this. And then later on, our third point is this. It gives them a clear idea of where the presentation is going. This is what I did today with this little diagram here. When you saw this, the start, the middle, and the end, I'm sure you all figured out these are the 3 points that we're going to go through today. You've got to tell your audience up front what they are, because no one likes being on a journey where they don't know where they are going. Okay? And the other thing to include, and I'm sure you know this already potentially, is stories. It's always very good when you're telling or making a point to tell a story. Now, Claire Miller, you're the story queen. Why do you think that is the case? Why is story so powerful? You tell us.
Stories help the audience connect into what you're saying and input emotions, and can be very relatable. Like, for example, I've written a story about a young fox who had a problem because his tail kept knocking things, and he had to make a cake for the competition for the wildlife fair, and his sister didn't help by running past him. When he was making his sponges, if you imagine he's making his sponge, it's on the day of the fair, so he can't make another one, and his sister comes along, and then his tail gets knocked, and he sees the sponge fall to the floor, and his mum catches it. For the moment, his heart is in his mouth because he's thinking he has no second chance, and he doesn't have a lot of confidence. So the story is a lot about building the fox's confidence, but it's always very relatable to someone, and they can find something in their life that they can relate it to. So not necessarily making a cake for a children's baking competition.
I see. So essentially, it helps the audience connect with the material when you tell a story. It's relatable for them. It also helps their understanding. A story often provides clarity in terms of what is being said. Another word for a story is an example. Really, it is. So think about it in that way. What examples could I give my audience to make this point more clear? Or what stories could I tell, depending on what lexicon you prefer? And then lastly, during all three of your points, or if you have more points, make sure that you give the audience a chance to speak. I think one of the big misconceptions around public speaking and presenting is that the speaker should be doing all the talking. That's not true at all. A speaker's job is actually to encourage and bring the best out of the audience. In other words, to get them to contribute, to get them speaking about the topic. And let's ask, for instance, let's come to Alex. What have you found the benefit today of this being interactive? What would you say has been the benefit for yourself?
It's more engaging. You concentrate more because you never know when Carl's going to ask you a question, and you get more out of it. Yeah, it's a lot better being interactive, and you avoid zoning out and just not listening and taking everything in that you're saying. So yeah. The interactive sessions are much better.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you said that. It'd be terrible if you said, I hate this interaction today. So that's good. But it's so true. By making it interactive, you keep the audience on their toes, and you also allow them to share value into your presentation. Because as a speaker, you don't know all the answers. Richard made a really good point today about the order of the 3 W's, which I wouldn't have considered before. If I'd just been talking at you, we would have never have heard that point. So try and have moments where you ask people questions, where you do breakout rooms, where you have discussions, maybe even give people a chance to speak in your presentation. These little things keep people more engaged in what your topic is. So 3 quick things there: signposting, stories, and giving the audience a chance to speak. Now, one little thing which you might potentially want to do in your presentation, and this is moving more into the ending now, is you might want to have a Q&A. You might want to have a Q&A, but it's very important not to end on your Q&A. We want to end on our call to action. Why do you think that is? Why do you never want to end your presentation with a Q&A? What do you think? Kathy, go ahead.
Because you're not in control of the Q&A. I mean, you can do your best with it, but you can't guarantee that you're going to be able to work your call to action into your final answer in any case. So you won't end on it. But anything could come out with you during the Q&A, and it could, you do your best with it, but it might kind of bomb and leave the wrong impression in people's minds.
Exactly. The ending of a presentation, it's a sacred place. And we don't want to give that control, as you say, Kathy, to someone else who might ask a stinker of a question and leave everyone on a downer. You want to make sure that you preserve that ending for your key point. So have a Q&A if you want to, but just make sure it's just before your ending. So just to summarize things there quickly for us today, this is a framework, a structure that you can use for really any presentation, whether it's 60 seconds or 2 days in length. You want to start with that ending in mind, okay? You want to start with the end, ask yourself, what's my key message? That'll help you come up with your key point, which then will lead into your call to action. For the opening, a good question, how can I earn their attention? That'll help you come up with a hook, which is so critical for getting them on board. You might need to introduce yourself with the 3 W's if you don't know the audience. The middle, what do they need to hear? What do they need to hear to believe this message? This will help me come up with a few different points at least for my presentation. And if I'm going to have a Q&A, I have it just before the ending so that I end with the words I want to end on. So with that in mind, before I end, any questions? I can maybe answer 2 quick questions if there are any about what we've covered today. Looks like it's all clear for everyone. I've either done a really good job or a really bad one. Nigel, go ahead.
Just one quick question, Carl. Is there ever a time or an example where actually you would finish on questions or not?
I don't think so. I mean, one potential time is when you're a facilitator and your job is to get other people to be having the discussions, making the decisions. But I feel even in that case, you want to really end with a summary of what is being said. So I don't think so, my friend. I think you want to make sure you never end on a question.
It makes sense what you're saying then.
I wonder what would be the alternative of, the way you're engaging with us with questions, our names and it's an online webinar, but if it's face to face and you don't know anyone in the audience, what would be your advice when it comes to engaging people throughout, not just at the Q&A?
So if I didn't know their names, it really would depend on the size of the room. If it was 20 people in the audience, I would make an effort to learn people's names by getting a list of who's attending beforehand and remembering that. And then also just being there early to meet people and, build a few connections and create some allies. So then I can come and say, oh, Lena, what do you think? Because I've met you before the event's actually begun. If it's a big audience, that's a lot more tricky because you're not going to remember 500 names. So it's all about just judging the size of the room and doing it in the best way you can, Lena. Does that make sense?
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. Richard, last question from you, my friend.
Yeah, so I'm curious as to where you might put feedback gathering into the structure of your presentation. In my speaking, I like to get feedback from people. I've tried it where it's at the very end, as in I've fully concluded my presentation and then people spend an extra 4 or 5 minutes filling it out. But usually people don't fill it out because they're off to the next thing already. I've also tried it where I do 3 minutes or 4 minutes of feedback during my actual presentation, and then I do my close, which gets more people, more forms handed back, but it can also drag down the energy. So I'm just curious if you have any experience around getting feedback from folks.
Yeah, I think if the goal is to get feedback, if that's one of your primary goals, you want to have it during your presentation because you've got them. This is their time and your time. So I think that's probably your best option in that particular case. And just to make it a quick feedback questionnaire, maybe something that just takes 60 seconds and doesn't drag on and kind of takes the weight out of and the life out of things as you say there, Richard. Super.
I wonder, sorry, Richard, have you tried using a tool like Menti so that it kind of is like part of your slides and it's quite engaged? And people
yes, I've tried a few different things now, but yeah, just wanted to get Kyle's thoughts if he's done it.
Super. No problem at all. No problem at all. Well, listen, one little thing I wanted to let you know about before I end with my key point today is that if you are interested in doing further training and coaching around presenting, something I have done recently is I've started working with people on a monthly basis, doing monthly public speaking coaching. And this is working really well because it makes good public speaking skills a habit for clients. So just to give you a sense of what that involves, it involves you and I meeting up, and you might recognize this handsome man here, Nigel. It involves you and I meeting up online every month, and we do either skill sessions or practice sessions. Skill sessions are where we cover a key topic in presenting, like how to add humor, for instance. We can do a session on that. Or we do practice sessions where you deliver your presentation to me and I give you feedback in terms of your delivery, your content, and your slides. Also in the training, there's a copy of the 5 pillars of effective public speaking. We've done one of those pillars today, which is structure, but there are 4 more, which I'm sure you would benefit from if you were interested in getting the book. And then lastly, included in the training is a webinar library. Think of this as like Netflix, but for public speaking. There's 25 different workshop recordings on there. I think Lena has actually used this before, and basically a bunch of resources that you can use and watch anytime, anywhere. Approximately in about, actually, you might have it now. You should have an email from me right now. I've got a wee guy in Eventbrite who's been sending it on my behalf. And if you are interested in what I've just talked about there, simply reply to that email saying, I'm interested, and I'll send you more information about what that training involves. But above all, I really hope you've enjoyed today's session. I hope you've gained a lot from it. I'll send you the recording tomorrow as well. And I hope now you know how to have a plan, how to create a structure for a presentation, which might even rival the beauty of the pyramids. Maybe. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Cheers, Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.